Hello, everyone, and welcome again. My name is Lara Lith, and I'm a water resource specialist with the City of Phoenix. This class today is selecting native plants for multiple benefits. So it's part of our annual webinar series, Hydrate the Valley Phoenix, sponsored by the Phoenix Water Services Department. This is our fifth and final class for this year, so super excited to have everyone join us, and I hope you learned a lot and learned some more today. Kaylee Colter, the founder of 88 Acres, she is here tonight to be our expert presenter on behalf of Watershed Management Group. Tonight's presentation is going to be recorded. We're going to upload it to the City of Phoenix YouTube channel, and then I'll also put it on our Save Water website, which is just going to be Phoenix.gov/savewater. You can watch all the previous videos on there too. We will pause in the middle for a quick break to answer some questions at around the 1 hour mark. But if you have any questions throughout the class, you can just put them in the chat and I will keep note of them and we can answer them halfway through or at the end. And then, yeah, chat is open, so just be respectful, try not to distract from anyone's learning, and we can go ahead and get started.
Great, thanks for the introduction. I'm excited to talk to you guys all tonight about plants. So that's definitely one of my favorite things to talk about. Let me know as we're going if you have any issues hearing me or seeing my screen or slides aren't, catching up. As Laura mentioned, tonight we're going to be talking about selecting native plants for multiple benefits. Again, my name is Kaylee Colter. I'm a landscape architect. I practice primarily here in the Phoenix metro area. And I've been working with Watershed Management Group for years now, and love the opportunity to get to present for them up here in the Valley. So if you ever have a chance to get down to Tucson and check out the headquarters for Watershed Management Group, it's a great, they call it a living and learning lab. And so they've got a lot of these techniques on display, a lot of these plants on display. And it's a really great educational resource if you ever have the chance to get down there and give a visit. So tonight we are going to talk through some things that you'll need in order to kind of select plants and develop your own planting plan for your project. So that will include first talking about native plants and the benefits of native plants, and we'll kind of talk about why this presentation focuses on those. Then we'll talk about the planning aspects. So, anytime you're doing a planting design, there's a design part of that. There's the plants and the design. So we'll talk about the design process briefly. And then I'll talk about kind of my general approach to selecting plants so that as you guys are developing your plans, you can implement those strategies. And we'll review some of the plants that I think are really big or the good ones for the kind of heavy hitters, the ones that are probably going to play a big role in your guys' plans, or at least I think should. And then some additional resources for you as you continue to do your design and your research and work on your projects. So the first thing I'd like to start off with is just a brief discussion about what does it mean for something to be a native plant or really to be native at all. And the thing about the definition of native, of a native plant, is that it is a little bit vague or a little bit undefined. So the definition can truly be pretty broad, which is a plant that grows in a certain place over a certain period of time. So you could obviously have plants that are native to Arizona, but you could also be talking about, some of the pines that grow up in Flagstaff, right? And so even though it's native, it's not actually a plant that's going to thrive down here in the Phoenix metro area. So we kind of need to narrow that definition down a little bit in order to select plants that are truly going to do the best in the valley here. And so what we're going to use for our definition of native plants are plants that are native to the Sonoran Desert. The Sonoran Desert is the desert that we live in, and there's actually subregions of the Sonoran Desert as well. And so we're going to look at plants that are from the two subregions that make up or, kind of touch the Phoenix metro area, which are the lower Colorado River Valley and the Arizona upland. This graphic, the map is a little bit hard to see those gray, uh, the gradients in gray, but those are the two areas, subregions of the Sonoran Desert that apply to us here in Phoenix. You can see that on that little dot there. Now, the lower Colorado River Valley is kind of that typical ecosystem you'll see, if you're driving from here to Tucson. It's just kind of lots of flat, lots of creosote, small shrubs, and maybe some trees where there's waterways or washes, but not a whole lot of variation. And that's that lower Colorado River Valley. The Arizona upland is where we'll start to see a lot more of our more unique, more beautiful or noteworthy species. So you'll start to see the columnar cacti. You'll see a lot more trees, and trees that are not just associated with washes. A lot more variety and diversity in the shrubs. And usually you'll see those Arizona upland areas in higher elevation areas. So, on the kind of outsides of Maricopa County, in the McDowell Sonoran Preserve, or, South Mountain, any of those mountain ranges where we get a little higher elevation. The temperatures cool down a little bit, and so we see more variation and more diversity in the plant material. But if you're selecting plants from either one of those regions, they should do really well here, especially if you're planting them in your yard. You're able to give them a little extra TLC. They'll do great. So the plants that I'm showing you tonight will all be, found natively in one of those two regions. Now, why are we talking about native plants tonight? So this is certainly not because I think that you should absolutely only plant native plants. And, if you even dare to plant a bougainvillea, I'm gonna, cast you out. Nothing like that. There are a lot of plants available that have a lot of great attributes, and, there's a purpose and a place for them. But today we're going to be talking about native plants because I think some of them often go overlooked. And one of the first reasons, if you were with us, I think it was last week when we talked about landscape design and rainwater harvesting design, one of the principles that we shared was to start with small and simple strategies. And I think selecting native plants really works with this because you're selecting plants that already have a propensity to surviving well here. They're already kind of inclined, or at least they already have some adaptations that allow them to survive in the climate conditions that we have here in the Phoenix metro region. So it's a little bit easier, especially if you're new to Arizona or new to, caring for a landscape. It's a little bit easier to start off with plants that are already inclined to survive, versus some exotic species that really need a lot of careful attention and care associated with them. So one of the reasons is it should make your job easier. You're going to start with a small and simple strategy by using native plants. Another great reason to select native plants is that they require less irrigation. So actually, this is both images here that I'm showing are creosote plants. So it's the same plant, but you can see that the creosote on the left has a way different appearance. It is a little bit more sparse. The leaves themselves are maybe like a little bit browner, and then the plant on the left is a little bit more lush, a little bit more green in color. And that's because one of these plants is getting supplemental irrigation and one of them isn't. So the one on the left is, this is actually at the botanical garden. This is in their native section. And so this plant isn't getting any supplemental water, which you can see it kind of changes the appearance. And all this means is that most of our native plants are really well adapted to drought conditions. So that means that if there's a period of time where we're not getting rain, where where temperatures are high, things like that, that can affect how much water the plants are getting, they have adaptations to survive those time periods. And so part of that is that they change their appearance a little bit. They may look a little bit more sparse. They may not look as happy, but they're still able to survive. And so, if we have a summer like we had last summer, or at least the beginning of this summer monsoon, where we're really dry, your native plants will tolerate those conditions a lot better than non-native plants. Another great thing about native plants is that they require less maintenance. So I'd like to, point out here that provided that you've selected the right location for the specific plants that you're using, most of our native plants require little to no maintenance. So I'm talking, more specifically about pruning. But as long as, they're not growing over a pathway or something like that, that's causing like a danger. Most of our plants don't, from a horticultural or health perspective, require pruning more than once a year. So as long as you can kind of make sure that you've got the right plant in the right place, you can really reduce how much maintenance you're doing. The plant on this slide is a really good example of that. So the plant with the purple flowers here, to the right of that sign, is a Texas sage. And this you've seen all over town. I have no doubt that you've seen this before, but typically it's kind of pruned into some kind of round, maybe hockey puck, ice cube, some kind of shape that's a little bit unnatural. And this is what that plant looks like if you allow it to grow in its natural habitat and you don't over prune it. And so, one thing is, I think it looks really beautiful. It has a lot of character and interest. The other thing, there's a couple of other benefits to it that, kind of are hidden here. One is that it's going to flower more. So, this is a plant that flowers on new wood, which means it flowers on new growth. And so if you're constantly pruning and pruning that new growth off, it never has a chance to set buds and make flowers. So you actually get less flowering from it. The other downside is that every time you prune a plant, you're actually inducing stress, right? That you're cutting branches, you're removing leaves that are used to photosynthesize. And so your plant has to recover from that. When it is in that recovery process, it uses more water. So the more pruning you do, the more water your plants need, the more of a state of constant stress they are in. And so it really affects their health in the long term. So if you actually just reduce that maintenance, you're not only saving yourself the time of the maintenance, but you're helping create a better, healthier plant, and a more beautiful plant that's going to flower more often. Another thing to note here is that the amount of growth that most desert plants put on is highly dependent on how much irrigation they're getting. So you can actually dial back the irrigation, make sure that you're using a conservative amount of water, and you'll also dial back how much growth that plant has. So if you have a plant that is, constantly growing over your sidewalk, you might consider dialing the irrigation back, and that'll make the growth restrict a little bit, and then you won't have to prune it as much. And then I like to point out too, if you want to do even less maintenance, so we talked about pruning mostly, but if you want to reduce the maintenance that you do for maybe cleaning up debris, flowers, seed pods, leaves, things like that, you can consider leaving that stuff in place and allowing it to become an organic mulch that will break down and add nutrition to the soil over time. Last week in particular, when we talked about rainwater harvesting basins, we talked about having organic mulch, especially in your basins. And so leaving the debris from the existing plants you have, that's a great free source of mulch. So it's just something to consider. Another great point about native plants is that they require less fertilizer. So native plants are adapted to the soil conditions that we have here. So I sometimes hear people say that in Arizona we have such bad soil. And, I like to kind of refine that statement a little bit in that we don't necessarily have bad soil. I mean, compared to, some nice Midwestern soils, it may not be well suited to agriculture, but it's not bad soil. It just has certain characteristics. And so once we know those characteristics, then we can work with that. And so one of those characteristics, for example, is that our soils tend to be low in available nitrogen. Nitrogen is a macronutrient for plants, meaning that they need it in very high quantities in order to survive and grow properly. And so a lot of our native plants are have some adaptations to deal with that. So the sign that I put here is a sign for a Palo Verde tree. Palo Verdes are native to our region. And it's part of the Fabaceae or pea family. And so plants in the pea family tend to have the ability to fix nitrogen. And what that means is that they actually form relationships with bacteria in the soil. And they're able to work with bacteria to actually make nitrogen more available. So there's tons of nitrogen in our atmosphere. It just tends to not be available in a way that plants can use it. And so our native plants have the ability to work with bacteria to make that nitrogen available. So despite the fact that, our soils may have this characteristic that they're low in nitrogen, most of our native plants have adapted ways to deal with those conditions. And so the benefit here is that if you're using native plants, really fertilizing should not be part of your regular maintenance routine at all. And so that just takes a whole side of things off of your plate. The other thing I like to point out, which I think is really important and really an interesting area of science, is that native plants are better for creating habitat. And what we're finding out is that native plants and having native plants available is essential for some of the animals that are on that lower part of the food pyramid. So, for example, there are a ton of insect species that are what we call specialist species. And that means that they've co-evolved with plants, in a specific region, and they are only able to digest and utilize those specific plants. Insects and other animals that are specialists can only survive off of those plants. So even if you had a bougainvillea or some exotic species like a citrus, uh, that plant might have flowers and nectar and things like that. But if the specialist species can't actually digest those plant materials, there's no benefit that's being provided. And that's what we're actually finding out. And so um, I think it's something on the order of 90% of butterfly and moth species are specialist species. And so they really require their specific host plants in order to survive and have healthy habitat. So even though it might seem like, you might not be able to provide meaningful habitat when you're in the middle of the city, it's actually really important. And having plants in your yard that can provide habitat for those insect species really helps play a role because, as you might remember for that food pyramid, those insects, they're foundational, they're on the bottom, and many other animals and creatures higher up on the list rely on those bugs. Um, so it's good that we think about them as well. If you're really interested in this and you are a little bit more curious about it, you can actually get your yard certified as wildlife habitat. So there's a couple of things that you have to do. You have to provide not just food, but food, water, cover, and places to raise young. And there's some instructions on how to do that and how to think through it. And so if you're interested in doing that, you can actually get a cool little sign to put in your front yard and get your yard certified. So that's through the National Wildlife Foundation, if you're interested in that program. There's also some resources available that are a little bit more local or regional. The city of Glendale a couple of years ago put together a wildlife garden guide. I don't know that there are printed copies around anymore, but it is available on their website. So if you Google it, you'll be able to pull that up and use that as a resource. And it's nice because it has animals and plants that are specific to our region. So you can get a little bit more precise with your recommendations. Okay, I like to show this picture because it's just one tree, one plant, but it ties all those things that we've been talking about together in just one example. So this is a native mesquite tree. This tree is no longer receiving supplemental irrigation. So it is established. It does not need additional irrigation any longer, which is part of the reason they're able to control the growth of this tree. And the reason I say that is if you actually look at the structure of the tree, there's not a lot of dead or broken branches in here. And so that leads me to believe that the growth is being controlled a little bit. It's not putting on weak wood. And so there's not as much branch breakage and damage in the tree. And by, limiting the irrigation, that's one of the ways you can control how fast that tree grows. Uh, the One of the other things that they're not doing here is adding fertilizer. This is also a tree in the Fabaceae family, so it is a nitrogen fixer. So it is not necessary to put any fertilizer down, which would only help it grow faster and put on more brittle, breakable wood. And so they're not having to do that. You can see that they've done some reduced pruning. And the reason I say that is because you can see that the branches actually are growing down to the ground. They're actually touching the ground. And left in its natural state, that's the shape this tree would like to take. And so it's got its nice natural shape to it. They've reduced pruning that's unnecessary. And because of that, they're able to provide cover and they're able to shade the ground underneath the tree. That actually helps keep moisture in the soil as well. So, by doing that, they can even further reduce how much irrigation they're putting down because they don't have to supplement as much. And it's a little bit hard to see, but they are leaving the debris here, like we talked about. So they're not raking up um, the leaf litter and seed pods and things like that. They're allowing that to stay. So over time, it's improving the soil. That's another reason they don't need to provide fertilizer. And that mulch also helps retain moisture in the soil. So that helps them not have to provide as much irrigation. And if we combine all that, it's creating some cool habitat spots. So, some nice places for animals and insects to enjoy the habitat created by that tree. All right, so the next thing we're going to go into is strategies for selecting your plants. So how do you go from, having a design to selecting the plants that are going to go into it? Okay. So where I always start is with the design. So very rarely do I start with specific plants in mind, maybe one or two things, like if we, kind of know that there's some kind of specimen plant that's going to be involved, but generally we're starting with the design. And what I like to do, and all this is going to kind of lead up to it, but what I like to do is develop the design to kind of what we call a conceptual stage. So this is a stage where you kind of have a general idea of what's going on, a general idea of what you'd like it to look like, but you haven't dialed into lots of specifics yet. So the first step, and a lot of these design steps, I'm not going to go into huge detail in this presentation. We talked a lot about that last week during the rainwater harvesting presentation. So if you weren't able to attend, excuse me, you might go back and listen to that one. But the first thing you want to do is, start to understand your space by putting together a base plan. So this means you're just collecting the information about your site. So, what does the site look like? Where are your property lines? You may want to pull up an aerial image and use that to help you put together a plan. You want to identify utilities. Utilities will be really important in terms of planting because you don't want to plant a tree directly over your sewer line or things like that. So you really want to be aware of where utilities are. Other things that'll affect your plant selection, plant placement would be grading and drainage. If you have any areas where water does not drain well in your yard, you might want to be aware of that. Most of our plants are natively found in places where the soil drains very well, so they don't like being waterlogged. They don't like having water sit on their roots. Um, and so if you were to have soil issues like caliche, that could contribute or impact your plant selection. Uh, Caliche, if you're not familiar with it, is kind of a phenomenon that occurs in soils in desert regions or arid regions. And calcium and carbon form calcium carbonate in the soil, and it forms like a thick layer of concrete. It's not concrete, but it's got like similar properties. And sometimes you'll find it in regions that were old, like agricultural regions, where the tilling was kind of done to this consistent layer year over year. But it just depends. It can be anywhere. And The reason I bring it up is because a lot of people often say they have caliche, and because we have really a lot of clay in our soils, we can have really firm soils, but not caliche. So I always like to say, if you think it's caliche, what I would do is kind of dig through the first 4 inches of your soil and then saturate that spot overnight, like really let a hose run over it. And if the next day you can keep digging and keep digging through that, then you probably don't have caliche, you just have really compacted, probably clay soils. If it were caliche, no amount of water would really make it easier to dig through. But anyway, keep that in mind. If you see an area that's not draining well, as in the water stays there for more than 36 hours, then I would look into it. That might be a good place to check and see if you have a drainage problem like caliche. All right. And then, so in terms of plant selections, we really want to make sure we know the orientation north, south, east, west. This will let you know what exposures you have in your yard and help you select plants based on that, which is really important, for making sure your plants will survive where you've planted them. You want to look into irrigation, what sources are available. Are you designing rainwater harvesting features? Those kinds of things will help with your plant selection. And then, just any other site analysis elements that you want to pay attention to. Are there sounds that you want to block? Are there views you want to enhance? Things like that. Okay, and so that's kind of all just the facts, right? That's what is on the ground. And the next thing you want to do is kind of think through your goals. What would you like the space to be? And so this is totally, being able to be driven by you. It's kind of what you want to make of the space, how you want to use it. And One of the things that I encourage you to think about is your landscape can be a functional space, right? It's not just a place that uh, uh, should look pretty and then it's just a bunch of maintenance to you. It should be a place that helps kind of enhance your lifestyle. One of the reasons most of us live in Arizona is because a portion of the year, it is a wonderful place to be outside. So make sure that you're thinking about that yard and your space as a place that you can really enjoy throughout the year. So some things like providing shade, like I was just talking about screening, if you have sound or visual things that you'd like to screen, plants can help you with that. How are you planning to use this space? Are you planning to have, dinners out there or entertain a bit, or do you have children that are going to play outside? All of those things would kind of help dictate your design and plant selection. If you want to have wildlife habitat, or are you using rainwater harvesting features? We talked about plants being an important part of that last week. So this is all about you, right? Like you get to decide and think about how you want this space to be. And then you're going to use your graphic skills to put together what we call a bubble diagram. So at this point, I like to start with, like I said, conceptual, meaning nothing's locked in. You know, it's all kind of vague and just general. And so these are two examples of nice bubble diagrams or conceptual diagrams. The one on the left here is really kind of truly a bubble diagram. And so if you're at all worried about, you know, artistic skills or anything like that, I like to show this one. It's super simple. It doesn't have to be fancy. This is just enough information for you to start understanding, you know, where things are going to be in relationship to each other. And just so you can start thinking about plants, knowing how much space you have, that kind of thing. It doesn't have to be set in stone yet. So you'll see that, for example, like in the backyard, all they've drawn is, you know, they've kind of got a blob over here. They want to have a small lawn area. Next to that is where their pool is going to go. They're going to have some more deck space. They know they want to have a shade tree back here, so they've just drawn a circle here. You can see they've also drawn in pathway, so they know they want a pathway along the side here. So all you're doing at this stage is just kind of laying out the basics. It doesn't have to be anything specific. You can also get really creative with this. So the one on the right is from Brad Lancaster's book. I mentioned that last week. And he does a really great example of one of a diagram here. He's kind of a funny guy, and so, you know, his is a little bit more creative and reflective of, you know, what he's interested in. So you can see he's got things like, you know, a picture of himself waving to somebody walking down the street. Like he wants to be able to look out to the neighborhood. You can see he's got dogs here. Maybe this neighbor has a loud barking dog that he's going to try and screen the sound from. So all this to say is just that it's up to you. You know, you get to make this drawing what you want it to be, and just be thinking, you know, in your mind, like how it's going to help you further along your planting design. Okay. So today we're going to talk through, we're going to definitely talk through some specific plants. And I've got them divided here by kind of their horticultural categories. So this is really like how we would use them in a design, not necessarily their botanical descriptions. So we'll talk about trees, we'll talk about shrubs of different sizes, we'll talk about accents. And so accents is kind of anything in the category of like cacti or agaves, things that don't really neatly fit into that shrub category. We will talk about some grasses. These are bunch grasses, not turf grass, because there is no native turf grass here. And then we'll talk about annuals and perennials. And these are kind of the more short-lived plants like wildflowers. All right. So what I wanted to just go over here is when you start doing your research for plants, you're going to find tons of information available. Uh, all of these are different categories that you'll sometimes see. You know, not every source will have all of this information, but you may come across it. The thing about it that's tough is that if you're trying to kind of put together a plant list, you won't always see all this information in the same place. So one source will have some of it, another source will have, you know, some of that, but it'll have other stuff too. So it's kind of hard to compare apples to apples. So what I'm going to present to you guys tonight is kind of my interpretation of which of these items are really important to pay attention to. So that way you're not having to kind of, you know, find every single piece of information. This will hopefully help you as you're selecting plants, to kind of narrow in on the things that are really important. So the one caveat to all of this is that typically one of the most important things that I look into when I'm selecting plants is the origin or native habitat. The reason that I find this is to be really helpful is that when you know where a plant is where it's from, like where, you know, it would be found naturally, you can kind of then make some hypotheses about what kind of things it needs to survive, or like what kind of conditions it will thrive under. So for example, if you had a plant that was native to like some of the Baja area, like Baja California areas, I would know that it kind of likes a little bit more tropical of a climate, that it probably doesn't like freezing. And so it gives you just a little bit of a shortcut. The caveat being that today we're talking all about plants that are in those two areas of the Sonoran Desert. So for tonight, it's not going to make a big difference. Everything is going to be in the same category. But typically, that's one of the most important things that I look at. Okay, so from there, you always want to look at the foliage form and characteristics. This is the shape of the plant, like what does it look like? Uh, and then the size, right? So we want to know what the size at maturity is. We want to make sure that even though we're buying it as a small little plant in a container, we want to plan for how much space it's going to need when it's full grown. So we need to know the size. Flowering and fruiting, this is generally one of the things that we're really looking for in a plant. We're looking to see if it flowers. We want the kind of the beauty from it. Um, and then we may be concerned about, you know, litter, things like that that can come from the flowering and fruiting. So this is always important. The temperature hardiness, I don't have that selected because, like I said, if you know the origin and native habitat, you don't have to get too specific on that. The sun exposure. So this one's really important for us here, just because we have sun exposures that can be really detrimental. And we can have plants that are actually, you know, they're desert plants and they're supposed to do well, but we have such, you know, intense sun that it can, you know, in the wrong exposure, even a desert plant can struggle. So we want to make sure we get the sun exposure right. Soil, watering, pruning, and maintenance, these are all things that are kind of associated with the plant being native. So we're not going to, you know, spend a whole bunch of time on that because we're selecting plants that are native. So we already know it's going to be well adapted to the soil conditions and our rainfall and pruning and maintenance requirements. Diseases and pests, if there's anything particular, I'll point that out, but um, often this isn't a huge one, especially for plants that are native. And then I like to boil all this down into plants that are like a pro and con for each plant, or maybe something unique about the plant. I just like to kind of get across like the gist. What's this plant good for? I find that it helps me to kind of remember the plants a little bit. So I'll be giving you guys that information for each plant as well. Okay, so I think this is a good stopping point, and from here we'll get into all of the plants. So if there's any questions, I can answer those, or and then we can take our short break.
Don't see any questions in the chat yet, so if you wanted to take a little break, Kaylee, feel free.
Sure. Well, we can keep going too if you'd like. I just see if there's any input from the chat.
Yeah, do you guys want to keep trucking along? Good to keep going? Okay,
Yeah.
well,
Okay, great. Okay, so we'll get into it. We're gonna start with trees. And we're gonna start with the heaviest hitter, the blue palo verde, the state tree. For each plant, I'm going to give you the common name and the scientific name. So the common name will be the one that's, you know, in big print at the top here. The common name is, it's kind of akin to a nickname. So one of the caveats of using common names is that they can vary. So in some places it may be called one thing, in other places it might be called something else. And so they can sometimes be unreliable. So, usually this is okay. I mean, usually people who are working around plants will know. But if there's something that you're really looking for, like very specific variety, it's good to know the scientific name because then you can, make sure that that's the plant you're getting. So I'll provide you both just for your guys' knowledge. So this is the blue palo verde. It's Parkinsonia, Florida. It has a partially deciduous habit, which means that deciduous means that a plant will lose its leaves uh, due to an environmental condition. Typically, this is seasonal. So, trees and plants that lose their leaves in the winter are deciduous. So this one is partially deciduous. It will lose a majority of the canopy, but it won't be completely defoliated. So it'll still have some leaves. This tree, the canopy kind of tends to have a rounded shape. So that can be a little bit weird to say, but what I find is with this tree, when you look at it from a distance, you'll see a nice rounded shape to the canopy. Other palo verdes and mesquites, they tend to be very irregular. And so this one tends to have kind of a nice overall rounded shape. So this is one of our larger trees. So size is 30-foot height and width. It has beautiful coverage of bright yellow flowers in the spring. It's usually one of the first trees to start blooming. So this will kind of start in April, depending on the weather. This one is great for a full sun exposure. So if you have a really tough full sun exposure, if you've got a yard, that's got nothing in it and you need some shade, this is a good choice. Um, the distinct trait of this tree, so often it does have a little bit of a bluish tint to it. It can be hard to tell, especially the older the tree is. But sometimes you can kind of see that blue tint. Um, but uh, I have got some pictures here of other Palo Verde species. As long as you can kind of tell it apart from the other Palo Verdes, that's the most helpful. So I'll kind of give you some tips for that. But the pros and cons, so this is just a great, fast-growing, large canopy tree. It's great for creating shade and really great for creating habitat. Um, and because it provides nesting and food sources, it's really important if you're interested in providing some habitat. So just a great choice overall. This one is a little bit more sturdy than some of the other Palo Verde varieties, uh, and uh, and it's our state tree, so it's a great choice. Okay, so as I mentioned, there's a couple of different varieties of Palo Verdes, and these can be really tricky to tell apart from each other. I think the easiest way is to look at the leaves. And so I've got the couple of samples here. The blue Palo Verde is on the top left. And it's a little bit hard to tell without scale, but that's a piece of paper, so I guess that kind of helps. But it has a little bit more like short, squat leaves. So that whole leaf section would be, about that big, a couple of inches. And so that's kind of unique of the Palo Verdes. The other one that's really easy to tell apart is the one just underneath that, the little leaf Palo Verde. It's also often called a foothills Palo Verde, but when I'm teaching especially, I call it little leaf. And one of the reasons is it makes it easier to remember how to ID it because it has the teeniest, tiniest little leaves on it. So that you can kind of barely see them there. And so that's a dead giveaway if you see that tree. And then the other two on the right here, the one up top is a Desert Museum hybrid, and the one on the bottom is the Mexican Palo Verde. The Desert Museum hybrid is actually one of the contributing parents to that plant is the Mexican Palo Verde, so that's why the leaves look really similar. But they have a much longer leaf, so it's several inches long, and it looks, kind of more willow-like because it's long like that. But it can be hard to tell, like if you just see the leaves, it can be hard to tell those two apart. So for that, you do have to kind of look at the whole tree. So again, I have a blue Palo Verde in the top left here. You can see it has a little bit of a rounded shape to it. You can see the Desert Museum hybrid next to it here. Has a really nice tree looking canopy to it. Maybe a little bit willow-like, kind of wispy, but it looks like a tree. Underneath that is the Mexican Palo Verde, and it's very hard to even make out a tree in that picture. And that's because the Mexican Palo Verde just really, from kind of like the horticultural perspective, it doesn't make a good tree for planting. It doesn't like to be pruned into the shape of a tree. It has really weak wood. It's just kind of crazy. So a lot of times, this Mexican Palo Verde, it's uh, it will grow from seed very easily, and so this will pop up in people's yards a lot of times, and they'll keep it because it's a free tree. But if it is this Mexican Palo Verde, you may not want to keep it, particularly if it's in an area where there's any risk of a branch falling or something like that, because they are just they're not what we call well-behaved trees. So if you do have the Mexican Palo Verde pop up, you maybe really want to consider whether or not to keep it. The one next to it here on the left is a Palabrea, actually. And so there's this one more variety. This variety is not native. It's a South American origin. But it's a really unique tree. It's a little bit less popular these days. But you can see from the canopy, the leaves grow really close onto the branch. So it kind of has this Medusa-like look to it almost, where you can see the branches as really well defined. And so that's a giveaway for that one as well. Okay, so the Arizona or velvet mesquite. This is kind of the main native variety of mesquite, and the scientific name is Prosopis velutina. Um, the form, again, is partially deciduous, so you will see it kind of lose leaves, lose kind of some of its fullness in the winter. This has more of a sprawling habit to it, so it doesn't have a nice rounded shape like the Palo Verde. It's more kind of branches sticking out and hanging out. There's a wide variety in the eventual size of this tree, and it's highly dependent on how much irrigation it gets. So you can see it is a little bit more upright. So the height range is 20 to 50 feet, whereas the width range is 15 to 25. So it tends to be a little bit more upright than it is wide. But again, it just depends on how much water it gets. The flowers on the mesquite are kind of inconspicuous, meaning you're not really planting a mesquite for its flowers. You can actually, it's in flower in the picture here. The flowers are kind of like these long puffball flowers. They're kind of cream colored. That kind of look like a Cheeto puff. So they're not, super showy. It does tend to flower a little bit later than the Palo Verde. So the Palo Verdes will kind of start, and then you'll see the mesquites going kind of in later into May. Again, this one will tolerate a full sun exposure. So, you know, if you've got a tough exposure and you need a tree that's really going to hold its own, this will do just fine. Some distinct traits it does have. This variety does have thorns. And then if you're trying to tell it apart from other mesquites, that can be tricky. But the leaves are a little bit more rounded than some other varieties. Some varieties tend to be pretty long. And these are kind of more rounded and more short. So some pros and cons for this tree: really fast growing, great tree if you're trying to get shade very quickly, has a nice large canopy, great for habitat, and even has edible pods. So the pods are edible to humans as well. They can be collected and milled. So if that's something you're interested in, that's a good variety to choose. There are some hybrid varieties of mesquite. So if you are looking for a variety that is thornless, or you're looking for a variety maybe that's seedless, there are some options out there. Some of them are hybridized with South American mesquites. Um, Most of them, especially if they're thornless, they're hybridized with South American mesquites. So just some options though if you are needing something different for your yard. The next one here is the desert willow. This is Chalopsis linearis. This one has really been, I've seen this all over town these days, so I think this is the tree of the moment. Um, the form is deciduous, so it is completely deciduous. It'll lose all of its leaves in the winter. And it tends to have a kind of like the mesquite previously, it has a little bit more of an upright shape to it than some other desert trees. This size-wise is what we kind of call a patio tree. So it's a little bit smaller in size, 15 foot to 35 foot height and width. It's definitely dependent on how much irrigation it's getting. So if it's, near a turf area versus, kind of in a landscape area like this, will depend on how big it gets. But it does have beautiful flowers. So it's got these showy white pink flowers that start popping up in this late spring and will go all the way through the fall. So usually they're the most intense in the spring, but they'll kind of continue on throughout the summer and fall, which is really nice. This will take a full sun exposure. It also tolerates some shade. It's traditionally found in riparian areas, so it can tolerate a little bit of shade. Some distinct traits. So the leaves are pretty unique. They're kind of long, linear leaves. They look a lot like an oleander leaf, just a little bit more narrow. And if you see the flowers, those are a dead giveaway. It has these beautiful trumpet-shaped flowers. And so they're great for pollinators of all types, especially hummingbirds. And there's a lot of cultivars, so there's varieties that have different colors. They're all kind of in the like pink, white, pink, purple range, but I've seen burgundy, I've seen more like purple. So it just kind of depends. And yeah, but this is a great small little tree, especially if you've got, a tight space. This is a great choice. All right, so we can't get to every tree, but so those are some really great options for you. A few others you might be interested in. The scrubby mesquite is another native variety of mesquite. This one is a lot harder to find at the nursery. So you may have to go to a native plant specific sale if you're looking for that, but it's a great one. It's got the seed pods have this cool scrubby like shape to them. The desert ironwood is a beautiful tree. So, it's another one that's a really great addition to your landscape. It's much slower growing. So if you're going to plant it, if you're looking for something that's going to provide instant shade, it's probably not the right tree. But if you're looking for something that can be a real focal point, the ironwood is a really good choice. Again, I briefly mentioned that little leaf palo verde. So if you're needing another small tree, the Parkinsonia microphylla is a good fit, as well as the featherbush tree. This tree looks a lot like a mesquite, but it is much smaller. And so it can, and less vigorous than a mesquite, and so it tends to be a little bit more well behaved. It's less likely to have really invasive roots and things like that. Um, yeah, so some other tree options for you. All right, so let's talk about shrubs next. All right, the first one here is tuberosa. This is Justicia californica. It has a very loose spreading form to it. You can kind of see it's just kind of going everywhere. And that is kind of enhanced by its size because it can get up to 6 foot height and width. So it can be a really large plant. It does depend on irrigation. I keep saying this, but when it's getting irrigated, that's when it tends to get to that larger size. If you saw it, while you were hiking or something like that, it would be much more like that 2 foot size. But in the landscape, when it's getting irrigated, it's much larger. So, you've kind of got the voluminous spreading shrub here. It has really pretty flowers, these salmon colored flowers that have a tubular shape to them. They tend to flower in the cool season, so it'll start kind of um, late winter, early spring. And as long as it kind of stays cool, the flowers will stick around. It will tolerate a full sun exposure. It can tolerate that. And it can tolerate some shade. So a lot of times it can be hard to find plants, native plants that do well in the shade. So this is a good, an option if you're needing something that'll do that. The distinct trait, if you see the flowers, they're a dead giveaway for what this plant is. Although I have seen some orange and yellow varieties in the last couple of years, and so that might throw you off if you're not familiar with those. But another way you can tell this apart is the stems. They tend to have this succulent, where they look like a succulent. They kind of have that kind of appearance to them, and they can be very brittle because of that. So sometimes you can kind of idea it from that if there's no flowers. This is a great shrub for attracting hummingbirds. Uh, that's where the name comes from. So that tubular shaped flower is really great for them. And this is just a really nice, lush looking plant for, for a native plant. So if you're kind of still looking to have that like lush feeling, but using native plants, this is a really good option. Okay, next one is one of my favorites. Um, I'll have a little soft spot for it is brittle bush. This is Encilia farinosa. It does have a rounded habit to it. So when you kind of look at it from afar, it has a rounded shape to it, much more than the tuberosa does. It tends to have a little bit more confined of a size, so 3 to 5 foot height and width. Uh, this has really bright, cheerful yellow flowers. It's one of the first things to really start. So oftentimes you'll kind of see it start flowering in the late winter. Just depends on what the weather's like or how warm it is when that starts happening. But yeah, you'll see it, like if you're driving from here to Tucson or, just about anywhere, you'll see it, along the sides of the roads. And so it'll have this kind of gray foliage, and then the flowers will kind of like shoot up over that. Um, and and most of the time that flowering is uh, kind of confined to the spring. Just depends if we get monsoon rains or something like that. You might see some more flowers pop up. This one is really tough. So it will take a full sun exposure. It'll also take what we call a reflected heat exposure. So that would be, for example, if you had a block wall, um, on the west side where it's just getting blasted by the sun in the afternoon. And then you had like a narrow landscape strip next to that. That would be a reflected heat exposure because not only is that plant going to get the direct sunlight, it's going to get heat from the wall bouncing onto it. And so that's really, really tough for most plants, but the brittle bush will tolerate that with ease. So anytime you've got a space where you're like, everything I put there dries up, it dies, that might be a good spot for your brittle bush. It might be able to tolerate that. Some distinct traits of this shrub. It does have a silver and a little bit of a fuzz to the foliage. So if you see that, that can be something that can help you ID it. And the shape of the leaves is triangular. So that's a little bit of a unique feature. You don't always see those triangular shaped leaves or diamond shaped leaves. So even if you don't see flowers, you can usually ID it from the foliage. I love this plant because it's super hardy and can tolerate just a lot of abuse, really. And it's great because it grows so quickly. You can buy a small sized container or, like a 1 gallon container of this, and it'll grow into a full size plant, really quickly. So it's a great way to kind of establish plants in your yard and have nice mature looking plants without spending as much money. And I think the yellow color with the silver foliage is really beautiful. So uh, this is a good one for getting your yards going. Okay, creosote. This is Laria tridentata. This is one many of you are probably familiar with. It's a really kind of uh, notable plant for us in the desert here in the Sonoran Desert. It has a very irregular shape. So again, kind of more like the tuberosa, where the branches are kind of doing their own thing. And the density, like I said earlier, it does vary. So it kind of depends if it's irrigated or not. And but the leaves are it is evergreen. So uh, well, I should say this one is a little bit drought deciduous. So it can drop leaves, but it tends to do that if we're having drought as opposed to just dropping leaves in the winter. The range in size, 3 foot to 8 foot height and width. This is a very long-lived plant, so they can get very old. So typically you'll see plants on that 8 foot range that are very old and established plants. It takes a while. This is one that kind of takes a while to get established and get going. So it tends to be small in the first couple of years, and takes a while for it to reach that full mature size. It does have yellow flowers that mainly happen in the spring, but will also happen if we're getting, a solid amount of rain. So you may see them throughout the year, but they're not spectacular or super showy. So these are them. They're just little kind of yellow, little yellow flowers, and then the seed pods there are those white, kind of uh, fuzzy balls there. Um, okay, again, yes, a full sun exposure. So like I was saying, this is the one you see, just out in the middle of nowhere. So it tolerates really tough exposures. And this one is really great. If you're planning to establish your landscape and you really want to wean it off of irrigation, in the long term, creosote is a really great one because it'll tolerate that perfectly fine. Uh, so so that's one to consider if you're gonna do that. Uh, so the distinct trait for the creosote is the smell. So if you're familiar with the smell at all, you'll know what I'm talking about, but it has this great kind of fresh, cooling smell that we kind of associate with rain in the desert. And so if you're, trying to ID it, you can just take a few leaves in your hands and kind of crush them up, and you'll get the smell and you'll be able to see it. You'll be able to ID it right away. So yeah, the pros and cons of this one, it's a great full-size shrub. Again, it will kind of have a nice established presence in the landscape, but it takes a little time for it to get established. So if you're, kind of okay with taking it a little while for it to grow and reach its mature size, eventually it will be a nice large shrub for your landscape. All right, so some more shrubs that we didn't get to, the triangle leaf bursage. This one you'll often find in that lower Colorado River Valley habitat alongside the brittle bush and the creosote. So if you're kind of doing more of a restoration type landscape and you really want to, kind of stick to strictly native, you may want to consider adding that one. The hotbush, Dodonea viscosa, this is a really great native choice for a hedge plant or a screen plant. So it's kind of like a replacement for oleander. Um, Grows similarly to oleander, will take hedge pruning. It tends to be a little bit less dense than oleander is, but it's a lot less poisonous than oleander is. So there's some trade-offs. The fairy duster, the pink variety is our true native variety, and that's a shrub that a lot of people really love. It has these beautiful pink flowers that look like little fireworks. And lots of different pollinators love them too. So if you're interested in attracting pollinators, it's a good one. Another one I really like that's kind of underrated, especially for habitat, is the desert hackberry. it's not always the most beautiful looking shrub, but it's really great for a bird habitat because it does produce an edible berry, and so the birds really love it. And it is quite pokey. It's not thorny per se, but it's very pokey. And so birds can create really safe nesting areas in the hackberry. And so I like it, you know, if you've got a yard that's got a lot of space, or if you have like a security concern, like an area where you don't want people kind of jumping over a fence or getting close to your fence, um, I think this one would be a great choice. And then you would provide some really nice habitat at the same time. And then the last one here I have is turpentine bush. It's just another example. This is a picture of it here of a shrub or plant that, you know, maybe is not necessarily the most beautiful shrub, but it has so much value in terms of providing habitat. So this is it while it's flowering, which the yellow flowers can look really pretty, but they do kind of turn to this like fuzz afterwards. It looks a little bit more messy than anything else. But the pollinators just love this one. So you can just see this is just a little section of it, but there's just tons of insects hanging out here. So sometimes, you know, if you're interested in providing that habitat, and you know, attracting wildlife to your yard, sometimes, you know, we're going to want to select plants that, you know, fulfill that role as opposed to just necessarily having the most beautiful flowers. So there we go. Okay. So let's talk about accents. The first one I have here is desert milkweed. This is Asclepias subulata. It has a rigid upright form, so it just kind of looks like you know, green stems. Not a lot of leaf coverage on it. Uh, the stems tend to be kind of a pale green color, almost a gray green color, and quite thin, kind of like an eighth of an inch thick. The general height is around 2 to 4 feet in height, and probably a little bit less than that in width. It's more upright. It does produce flowers. It produces these pale yellow flowers. You can see them in the picture. They can be really top heavy. Especially if you are planting this in and it gets any kind of shade. If it gets any kind of shade and then the flowers grow on it, all those stems just flop right over and it looks kind of um, uh it looks kind of sad. So my top recommendation for this one is to make sure that it does have a full sun exposure. It really just needs to be blasted with sun all day long. So, you know, that actually is quite beneficial because, you know, some things can't really tolerate that, but this thing really needs it. Um, I talked about some of those distinct traits. Now, so this milkweed, you know, is a really great example of one of those plants that helps us support specialist species. So milkweeds are host plants for monarch butterflies. Monarch caterpillars need desert milkweed to grow and kind of complete their life cycle. And so it's really important for us to be able to provide these types of plants in our landscapes so that they can be used by those species. There's a couple of other varieties of milkweed. They're a little bit harder to grow. They need a little bit more TLC, and in Arizona, this one's kind of the most foolproof. So that's why I've got it on the list. Okay, next one here is Perry's agave. There's all kinds of agaves. This one is agave perryi is the scientific name. All the agaves have this kind of upright shape. They look kind of like the top of a pineapple. So they all kind of have that general rosette-like shape to them. This one is a smaller agave. So at its full grown, you know, end of lifespan size, it can get up to 3 feet by 3 feet. Uh, So this does produce a large, tall flower spike that's very, very showy. The only downside is with agaves, they are all what we call monocarpic. So they will fruit or go to seed or flower only once in their life cycle. So although the agaves have a really beautiful kind of cool flower, you don't really want to see it because it means that your plant is nearing the end of its lifespan. Um, Oftentimes, it just depends on the agave, but oftentimes, um, either smaller, we call them pups, but smaller agaves will pop up from the original one. So you might lose the original plant, but the pups will pop up. Or sometimes they actually create actual little pups that grow on the flower stalk itself. So oftentimes you do, it's not the end, but yeah, it will, that flower stalk will mean your agave is nearing the end of its lifespan. So this one in particular will definitely tolerate a full sun exposure. It's got those tough kind of leathery leaves, but it will also tolerate some shade. So it's really great, if you're, again, you've got a tricky shady spot, this agave will do well in that. So when we're IDing agaves, there's a couple of traits that we look at in order to ID them. And so we look at what things we look at are the thorns. And so agaves can have thorns in a couple places. They can have thorns, what we say are on the margins. So that would mean on the edges of the leaves. So kind of what you see here. And they can also have a terminal spine, which means a spine at the tip of the leaf. And so this agave has both. It has spines on both, so it's pretty um, a little bit aggressive. So it may not be the best choice for, next to your pool if you want to keep your beach balls intact. But because of those spines, it does create those really cool patterns on the leaves as they grow and unfold. So, the upside of those thorns is that you get a really beautiful agave. So some pros and cons. This is just a really hardy, it's generally very long-lived agave, and it tolerates, kind of like a little bit of everything. So it's very versatile. All right. So one thing to mention about the agaves, and I think this is a good example of what I was talking about earlier with kind of knowing where a plant is from. There are agaves from all over the place. And so although they look like a very desert type of plant, kind of like a cacti, they're not all really well suited towards that environment. So I got a picture here. This is a sign from the botanical garden. But in the summer, they often have to cover a lot of their agaves with shade fabric. And because at the gardens, of course, they collect agaves from all over the world. So they have plants that are definitely not from the Sonoran Desert here. And not all of those are able to tolerate a full sun exposure here. They need a little bit of protection. And so that's an example of like knowing where that plant originally grows from or where its native habitat is can kind of help tell you how to care for that plant. Because if you really like it, it may not mean that not necessarily mean you can't plant it. You just have to be really kind of thoughtful about it. So for example, this agave attenuata that's up here in the top left. Again, this is one I was saying this is kind of a Baja California native plant. And so some things we know about that region is it's got a little bit more of a tropical climate than we have here. So for one thing, that means the summers don't get as hot, and the winters don't get as cold. So it doesn't often freeze and it doesn't often get, 120, right? And so if you were to plant that plant here, you would need to find kind of a microclimate or, kind of a small space that could kind of emulate those conditions, right? So maybe in a courtyard or nearby a fountain, something like that, that could kind of help keep the temperature more regular. The Queen Victoria agave, on the other hand, on the right, is native to kind of the mountainous regions of southern Arizona and northern Mexico. And so, even though, it's not kind of native to the areas around the Phoenix metro area, it's native to a very mountainous area, so can definitely tolerate our cold temperatures here in the winter. And because of that, where it's from, it's really exposed to lots of wind and other kind of tough conditions. And so it's one that it does end up working really well here because it is so tough and hardy. So just an example of kind of, even though a plant may look like it is well suited for our area, just to kind of know where it's from, where it's supposed to grow. And that can kind of help you figure out how to place it or locate it in your landscape. So two other examples I threw in on the bottom there, the century plant and Weber's agave. These are uh, also non-native agaves that are really hardy, do well here. And they're larger varieties. So if you're looking for something that's, much bigger, that'll get kind of 4 to 5 feet in the landscape, then those two are good choices. Okay. Engelmann's prickly pear. So this is Opuntia engelmannii. This is a pretty gnarly example of a prickly pear, and I'll talk you through a little bit of that. But so it's got the large, disc-shaped pads like most prickly pears have, and has a very spreading habit. So this is not one that kind of keeps a nice tight rosette. This one spreads out. And so you'll see that reflected in the size. So it can be 6 foot height, up to 15-foot width. And that's just because, kind of keeps spreading, and, paths can drop off. And when they drop off, they can root down and, keep growing. So it can kind of keep spreading and getting bigger that way. It does have really gorgeous, like most cacti, I really have these really gorgeous, beautiful flowers that only last for that short period of time in the spring. The flowers here tend to be kind of yellow, orange, pink, salmony color. And this one will tolerate, so this one, full sun, totally fine with full sun. You can, give it a really harsh exposure. It will tolerate a little bit of shade. The more shade you provide it, the more lanky it will get, or kind of like floppy. So I would try to kind of stick with more sun exposure if you can. So similar to the agaves, one of the ways you can classify the prickly pears is by the types of spines that it has. So there's a couple of ways they can have the spines. One is to just have the traditional pokey spines. So you can see those here, those kind of yellow golden color, like what you'd see on a saguaro as well. So prickly pears can have those, and then they may or may not have what are called glockids. So if you see where those spines come out, there's kind of a dark brown circle or a dark brown patch there. Those are glockids. Um, and those are just like little tiny, sharp little daggers. It's kind of like fiberglass. So once you kind of get it in your finger or your hand, it's just it's really difficult to get them out. And they can be, more abrasive and more annoying to deal with than the spines. And so this one does have both of them. So what I would say is if you want to plant this one, I would just make sure you give it all the space it needs and put it somewhere where you're just kind of never going to have to touch it. It's a great plant. If you have a large lot and you're trying to kind of take up some space, you can get one of these bad boys going and really fill up your landscape quickly. If you want, something for a little bit of security, it could be something like that. But the reason I included this one is because it is one of the better varieties if you want to collect prickly pear fruit from it. So it's one of the more consistent, tasty producers. So if you want the if you want the fruit from it, you may have to put up with some of the dangerousness of the prickly pear itself. Okay, the Ocotillo Aquarius splendens. This has a really upright, tall, kind of rigid branch-like shape. Again, it's kind of got that like Medusa-like shape, right? The shape of the branches with the leaves tight on the branch. These can get up to 15 feet in height, a little bit smaller width. It does have really pretty and interesting flowers, these red flower stalks that kind of look like a bird. And mostly these will happen in the spring, but they can happen with monsoon rains or rains throughout the year. So it just kind of depends. But hummingbirds like these flowers and other pollinators as well. This does and does best with a full sun exposure. So, you know, if you are trying to take up some space in a kind of a blank slate type landscape, this is a really good one for that. Uh, the distinct trait, it's just such a unique looking plant. So it is pretty distinctive on its own. The flower stalks, if you see those are pretty unique giveaway. And it has kind of a smaller shaped leaf that grows really tight on the branches. But I like to include this one because it has that very upright, almost what we would call columnar shape to it. And I find that for a lot of landscape design, people are using palm trees to kind of have that effect. And I like to include like the Ocotillo and some of the other columnar cacti because if you need a really tall, kind of narrow um, accent plant, this is a good way to do that by using a native plant instead of going for something like a palm tree. All right, some other accents that might interest you. Saguaro, of course, is a great option. However, it grows so slowly. So it just kind of depends on if you're patient or not. The Engelmann's hedgehog cactus is a great small cactus. Now that one is very pokey, but it has really beautiful flowers in the spring that are like hot pink. There's a variety that's kind of like a bright red. So if you have kind of a smaller space where you get to really get a good view of those flowers, that would be a good choice. The organ pipe cactus, another maybe kind of alternative to the ocotillo. It has the columnar shape to it as well. And the desert spoon, it's a little bit different from an agave and can get quite big, so it can take up a lot of space. It's one of my favorites. It's a really great hardy plant for the landscape. All right, so let's talk about some grasses. Now, I've just got a couple here, and these are the bunch grasses. So, like I said, they're not, they won't grow into a turf. You can't use them as an alternative to Bermuda grass. They grow in a bunch or a clump. And I particularly included these because they're really great for rainwater harvesting basins. So I think last week I was mentioning, they have grasses tend to have very fibrous root systems, which is very useful for erosion control and holding soils in place. So the first one I have here is deer grass. This is Muhlenbergia rigens. It's a larger grass, but it's very airy. The leaves are very kind of narrow, so uh, uh, they don't take up they're not very bulky. And this one, so the size here is generally 3 to 5 feet, kind of depends on the exposure. If it's getting a little bit more shade, the leaves will grow out a little bit longer and extend. All the grasses have flower spikes. They're generally a lot less showy than other plants. You're usually not um, getting these for the flowers in particular, or the flowers, they just don't have a lot of color to them. So they may have cool texture, but they're not going to be, bright colors. Uh, this one will tolerate some shade. So if you're looking for a shady tolerant plant, this is a great one. And like I said, those leaves are a little bit narrow, so it's hard to tell grasses apart. But you can kind of, if you're looking at a leaf, grass, and it's got kind of fat leaves that are wider than an eighth of an inch, then it's probably not this Muhlenbergia. This is a really versatile, easy to grow, pretty tough, pretty hardy grass, and a great choice for especially a rainwater harvesting basin. The other nice thing about the Muhlenbergia is there's a lot of varieties of them. So the deer grass is the one I showed you on the last slide. This Muhlenbergia capillaris is another variety. It actually has mauve colored flower spikes, and so this is one that does have a little bit of color to it if you were looking for that. A lot of the grasses look really great when you kind of put them together in masses. Um, and they look great with, different lighting techniques on them. So just keep an eye out. There's a lot of different varieties depending on kind of what size you're looking for and things like that. Another choice for a bunch grass would be this blue grandma. This is Bouteloua gracilis. It's a bunch grass, but it's a little bit smaller, so kind of max 2 by 2. It has greenish purple flowers that turn into these kind of comb-like seed heads. I think I've got a close up there. Yeah. Uh, it will tolerate a full sun exposure. It might, and it will tolerate a little bit of shade. It's not on here, but it will. And the distinct traits are these comb-like seed heads. So if you are able to see them, which there's usually a couple at least kind of like hanging around on the plant, you should be able to ID it. Uh, it is a fast grower. The great thing is this kind of nice petite size. So if you have a really narrow space, this is a one that will kind of fit in there without having to be pruned over and over. And if you need to stabilize slopes and you're working with a rainwater harvesting landscape, this will come in handy. Okay, annuals and perennials. Now, annuals and perennials, just briefly, are herbaceous, meaning the stems and the plant material is more green. It's not woody and fibrous. And annuals would be those that complete their life cycle in 1 year, and perennials are those that would complete their life cycle over maybe a couple of years. So just as an FYI before we get into them. Perry's penstemon, so this is Penstemon perryi. It forms an herbaceous rosette, so it's kind of got a nice clump of foliage, and then as it starts to flower, it will shoot up these flower stalks that you see on the right. So the rosettes themselves tend to be smaller, but once it starts shooting up the flower spikes, those can get upwards of 3 to 4 feet. The flowers are the biggest thing to ID it and what they're grown for. So these beautiful magenta flower spikes. Again, it's that tubular shaped flower, so really great for uh, hummingbirds in particular, but other pollinators as well. And this pretty strictly happens in the February to March spring timeframe. I find that the penstemons are a little bit less likely to hold on and kind of survive throughout the summer. Uh, this will take a full sun, but will prefer a little bit of shade, especially in the afternoon. And especially if you're kind of trying to keep them around as long as possible, a little bit of shade would be helpful. The distinct trait are the tubular shaped flowers if you see them. So that, I mean, that's kind of a dead giveaway. Sometimes you'll see it without that. And the foliage is a little bit unique. It's these very long linear triangle shaped leaves. So if you see those without the flowers, that can kind of help ID it. Uh, let's see. Yep, a really great plant for pollinators. There are also other varieties of penstemons that do really well here. So if you're looking for like a slightly different color or something like that, there's some other varieties out there. Now I did mention this is one that tends to be more of a true annual. It's not going to, continue throughout the summer, but it will reseed. So if you allow the flower stalks to complete. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, 1 second. Can you hear me all right if
Yeah, you're all good.
okay, you can hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Just 1 second. I'm so sorry about this.
No worries. Yep.
Okay, apologies. Okay. So let's see. All right, the next one here is globe mallow. Globe mallow is one of my absolute favorite plants. So this is Spiralcia ambigua. It has a very irregular shape to it. It doesn't have like kind of a nice rounded shape, but I think that kind of makes it unique and gives it some character. This generally tends to be around 2 to 4 feet, and kind of tends to stay in the original plant, so it doesn't spread too much. The flower color, so what you'll see kind of hiking and naturally is this bright orange color. But it does come in a ton of varieties. So if you buy it from the nursery, you'll often get a different color. I've seen it's basically everything but yellow. So kind of I've seen white, pink, magenta, purple, all kinds of colors. This one I love because it will do really well with a tough full sun exposure. It will tolerate a reflected heat exposure. So it does all that and it has these really beautiful flowers. So I love it. It tends to be more of a perennial, so it tends to persist. I've had some in my yard for, I don't know, 7, 10 years, something like that. So they keep going, and they will reseed as well. So it just kind of depends. Um, but yeah, it has these beautiful paper-like flowers and really unique colors, colors that come in. We get a lot of yellow plants, so it's nice to have something that has a little bit different color. The desert marigold. This is a great smaller sized a perennial. And again, this one tends to be a little bit more of a perennial than an annual. It has a clumping rosette, so it kind of forms this base of foliage and then shoots up these yellow flower stalks from there. But it's more petite, so it's kind of a 2 by 2, although that original plant can kind of spread out a little bit. So it can take up a little, kind of migrate a little bit. This flowering happens generally in the late winter, early spring. It's one of the earlier things to start flowering. But as long as it's protected, it'll flower all throughout the summer. I've got one that gets shade half of the afternoon, and it's been flowering since since the spring of last year. So, not as intensely, but there's still flowers there. The unique features, it's got this curly silver foliage. So that's kind of a unique thing if you don't see the flowers. But another thing, just in general, to think about these annuals and perennials is that there is a period of time where they're not going to be growing. Um, really, they may not be there at all. So if they're penstemons, they may not be there at all. But if there are other plants, they may not be growing as actively. And so just think about that in terms of your design. I think they did a great job with this design here, where they have a lot of cacti taking up this space. So when those, you know, desert marigolds die back in the summer, there's still something of interest there. But then when the desert marigolds grow, they kind of grow with these cacti and create this cool feature. So just think about that in terms of your plant selection. Here's a couple of other annuals and perennials you might be interested in: chocolate flower and paper flower. The firecracker penstemon is another variety of penstemon that has a little bit different colors, so that's one to check out. And that one typically does really well here. All right, so where you can learn more, of course, there's tons of other plants to look at. So here's a couple of different resources. The one that I've been really recommending lately is the AMWA resource. So that's that one kind of in the middle there. The amwua.org/plants. They recently updated this website, and so it's really, really, really useful. It's got really nice pictures so you can tell what everything is. And they have some features that allow you to like create your own list, and then you can print it out and take it to the nursery with you. My clients have been finding that website really helpful. Where can you find native plants? So it can be a little bit tricky to kind of source these plants and order them. If you are working with a landscape contractor, they'll have access to wholesale nurseries. And so a lot of times they'll be able to get a lot of these plants that we've been talking about. If you're trying to buy them from a retail nursery, it can be a little bit harder, but definitely seek out your local nurseries. The bigger box stores are going to have way less selection, if they have any selection at all. And so depending on where you are, I've got a couple, I live in Phoenix and visit Phoenix nurseries often. So there's a couple here, but you can also check out the Arizona Nursery Association. They have a like yellow pages for their members. And it'll say like if they grow native plants or, trees or whatever, or what have you. So you can use that as a resource too. And then other places like the Botanical Garden has plant sales twice a year. So does Boyce Thompson. So places like that. And that's about it. So I'm happy to stay and answer questions if I can. You can always reach out to me as well, via email or via my phone number here. Thank you guys all for making some time on a weeknight and talking plants.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. We do have a few questions. I can fly through these quickly. The first was the hybrid mesquites that are crossed with thornless South American trees. If they have seeds, will the seed pods taste good and can they be milled? Do you know about that?
Oh boy, I don't I don't know enough to give definitive information on that, but um the group that used to do the mesquite pod milling up here was the Urban Farm, Greg Peterson's Urban Farm. So you might look, his website might have more information. And then I think the group in Tucson is the Desert Harvesters. I think that's their name. And they might have some more information on that.
I think trees matter might be a good one too. I'll put their
Yeah, I think they
yeah.
have been taking over or partnering with the Urban Farm to do the milling or something
Yeah.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds right. Someone also asked, it seems like brittle bush is in the wild goes dormant in the heat and becomes brittle. If it is planted in a bed on a drip system, will brittle bush stay pretty silvery green? Should it be rigorously pruned once a year?
Yes, that's what I'd recommend. So yeah, if you've got it on irrigation, it will, like I said, most of these plants are drought tolerant, which means they'll adapt. And so that's one of the things that it does is drop foliage, get more dry and brittle. So if you keep it on irrigation, it will look more lush. I would recommend a hard prune on it once a year just to refresh it. And You can do that after it flowers, kind of like in the late summer, before a lot of the winter growth kicks in.
Cool. Okay, another question. A desert willow shut up in my yard over the summer. It's growing like crazy with roughly four pinky finger size stems coming from the base. It's about 3 feet tall already. Should I trim it to one stem or leave it multi-stem? Can I also transplant it before it gets too big, as I would like it in a different space in my yard?
Mm, mm. Yeah, so you can definitely attempt to transplant it, and you do that before it gets too big. Um, I would try to do it when it's dormant, so wait till it drops all of its leaves and it's dormant. Um, and um, and if you do transplant it, then I would wait to do any pruning until it reestablishes. Um, and I wouldn't prune it before that either. If you're planning on trying to move it, I would just, let it focus on that. And the only other thing is you want to try and get as big of a root ball on it as you can when you do try and relocate it.
Um, this other one, I think Charlie covered some of this in his plans for multiple use, I think it was, or it was one of the last ones that we did. But the question is, I would love a list of edible and medicinal plants, trees, etc. Does anyone know where I can get a list of desert plants like this? Edible and
Okay.
medicinal. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if yeah, so like I was mentioning, there's a group down in Tucson that they have. I don't know if they have information on medicinal, but they do have edible plants. I think it's Desert Harvesters or Sonoran Desert Harvesters. They have a cookbook called Eat Mesquite.
Mhm.
So so they're a great resource for edible plants. Medicinal plants, I'm not thinking of a resource off the top of my head. Um, I always like to start with the cooperative extension because they usually have really great information. So that's where I would start, and then we kind of look around from there.
Yeah, and I think I have it here. The last we did one of the classes were on Sonoran desert harvesting. I'll put that in the chat, and I think we covered it a little bit. There's the recording, but you may be able to find some re I think at the very end of that video, Charlie gave some resources about books. Um, let's see. Someone also asked, does jasmine grow well in Phoenix?
We have two jasmine vine varieties that do well here. There's a uh gosh, now the names of them are totally spacing me, but there are two varieties that do okay here. They generally need more water. They'll need more water than all the plants that we've talked about today. But there are a couple of varieties that do well if you check at the nurseries that they typically carry them.
Let's see. I think yeah, I put the recordings in the chat. We have them on our website. Um, Melissa, I don't know if she said rosewood versus hopseed for noise mitigation and dent screen. I don't know.
Yeah, I think I know what she's talking about there.
Okay.
So um I think rosewood is like ultimately like the better plant, but it's much slower. Like it takes a while to establish and stays really small for like the first several years. So at least in my experience, and I've also planted some in flood irrigation, and so that didn't even help. So if you're patient, then I would go with the rosewood, but the hot bush will establish much quicker.
And then looks like the last question here, are seeds an option for growing desert marigolds and other perennials?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I totally spaced on mentioning that, but yeah, absolutely. So sometimes you can find them in a mixed wildflower uh package. So if you're going to buy any kind of mixed wildflower seed, really read it and make sure it's got the varieties that are actually going to grow here. Um, but if you can buy them individually, that's probably a better bet. But yeah, I mean, I've seen them at Barrage, I've seen them at Summer Winds before. You can also order from Borderlands Nursery. They're kind of in southeastern Arizona. And what was the other one I was going to mention too? Oh, you might look at uh, City of Phoenix. They have some native plants, and some of the other cities might too in their plant libraries. So a
Hmm.
lot of places have seed libraries
Yeah.
at the local libraries, and sometimes they have native plants in there too.
Yeah, we have them at the libraries. I also just put something from Water Use It Wisely in the chat. We just got a bunch of seed packets for native wildflowers, and
Oh, yeah.
desert marigolds are in there. And if you, the link that I just sent, if you sign up for their newsletter, they'll actually send you a free packet in the mail. So that'd be pretty cool if you wanted to start out. I planted mine a few weeks ago, and they sprouted very quickly. And there's a nice variety in there. They have I can't remember all of them off the top of my head, but they're pretty good native wildflowers in there. Um, but yeah,
And this
if
is a
that's
good time of year to plant them as well. So,
yeah.
like, or to disperse them. So, you really kind of want to look for the fall and kind of pay attention to the forecast. Um, and if there's, looking like we're going to have a rainfall that's, doesn't there's not like an amount that's necessary, but one that's going to like actually dampen the soil and keep it moist
Mhm.
for a day. um, if you can throw them out like the day before that or a couple of days before
Yeah.
that,
Yeah,
that's
I did
ideal.
mine right before the rain that we had
Yeah,
recently, and they loved that.
perfect timing.
Yeah. Okay, so if you have any more chats or questions, you can put them in the chat. You can also email me questions. My email is lara.vanlith@phoenix.gov. I can always send them over to Watershed Management Group to get their insight, if it's class related. Um, Otherwise, we can wrap up. Thank you all for sticking around. I hope you like learning about natives, and thanks for spending your evening with us. Again, this is going to be the final class of the series, so unfortunately we're not meeting next week, but please give some love in the chat to Kaylee. She's been an awesome teacher. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us too. It's been great. Um, and I'll also put the Save Water, our link in the chat. This is our main website. I don't know if that link is going to be active, but feel free to look. We'll have all of these videos posted on our website. And yeah, let us know if you have any questions. And thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you guys.
That comes to mind
Good
for
night.
thinking through some of this is